Hey team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. The Ukraine War news update, second part thereof, for the 3rd of December 2023. Somewhat delayed, do apologise, but I am here now. Let's go straight to where I normally start, the military aid, or the aid segment, before we get on to geopolitics. US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has said, we will not let Hamas or Putin win. So US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin criticised those endorsing, quote, an American retreat from responsibility at the Reagan National Defense Forum, emphasising the necessity for consistent US leadership to contribute to a world that remains as safe, free and prosperous as possible. This is good news and appealing probably to those Reagan Republicans that I think are super important. They, you might argue, is the sort of core establishment Republican position that is being somewhat hijacked by, arguably, by the MAGA wing of the Republican Party as of late, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. I don't want to be divisive with my American viewers, though. Austin delivered a lengthy defense of US support in Ukraine in its war against Russia and Israel and its war against Hamas. In both Israel and Ukraine, democracies are fighting ruthless foes who are out to annihilate them, Austin said, and we will not let Hamas or Putin win. And we will not let our enemies divide or weaken us. So as we surge support into Israel, we remain focused on Ukraine. Again, even that language speaks to more support, more bandwidth for Israel than for Ukraine. I think that is a challenge going forward. Department of Defense Acquisition Head Bill LaPlante said US can make 100,000 shells per month by 2025. So that was their kind of plan, up from 14,000 a month 6 to 8 months ago, but only if the supplemental budget is passed by Congress. If we won't, or aid packages, if we don't get the supplemental, we won't get there. Money needed to get the rate from 80,000 to 100,000 that's needed, but and that's where there is this loggerheads, or both parties seem to be at loggerheads with each other. So Doug Klain here says, I've heard from more congressional Republicans this week, and this was partly what's got me a little bit depressed this morning, amongst all the many variables that one has to consider when giving an evaluation of what's going on a daily basis. But he said that I've heard more congressional Republicans this week that they don't expect Ukraine aid to pass by the end of the year due to the growing fight over immigration policy changes. They think Democrats need to fold on this, and Ukraine aid may not pass until January, February 2024. This is really worrying, and it shows, as I said this morning, that that many Republicans place the border issue as of higher priority than Ukraine. And obviously, that's perfectly fine, I guess, if you're an American with those particular considerations to take into account. Now, whether the border truly is the issue that it is claimed to be is open for debate, and there are certain analyses that will show, or that will conclude, that actually the American Republicans in these lawmakers have been shutting down assistance packages to the border in particular ways. I mean, I don't want to get into long weeds of that, but there are some who say actually there could have been action there, but it was not accepted by the Republicans. And anyway, Doug Klain continues, I asked Republican Mike Turner about this on Wednesday at the Atlantic Council event, and he said the sticking point in the administration is that the administration isn't ready to concede, quote, that there's been an absolute failure in their southern border policy, so Ukraine aid will be held up. And this is really unfortunate because this will cost lives. It will literally cost lives. So in doing this and using Ukraine as a political bargaining chip for greater aid to the southern border, Ukrainian soldiers will not get the aid they need, and as a result will perish. That I'm fairly sure. The original White House supplemental request included funding for border security, but Republicans don't just want funding, they want changes to immigration policy, summed up by Politico here. So tougher border security is the GOP's price to unlock President Biden's $106 billion supplemental funding request for aid to Ukraine, Israel and Taiwan. And the negotiations are now centered around three big issues. So just to let you know, at least according to Politico, asylum standards. When migrants apply for asylum, they are screened to determine whether they have credible fear they will be persecuted or tortured if they're returned home. Republicans want a higher standard, which would result in more migrants being removed. Safe third countries. There are discussions about expanding the number of countries where asylum seekers would be required to seek protection first if they pass through on the way to the US border. Canada, for instance, is designated as a safe third country while Mexico isn't. Parole authority. Presidents have the authority to temporarily admit people to the US for humanitarian or other reasons. For instance, Biden has used these parole powers to allow in thousands of people from Afghanistan, Ukraine, Venezuela, Cuba, and elsewhere. Republicans want to vastly curtail this authority. In terms of the politics of these three issues, Democrats seem resigned to accepting a revised asylum threshold, deeply hostile to meddling with parole authority, and somewhere in the middle on safe third countries. So there is area for compromise. However, I guess what gets me is that in a perfect world, I would like these two issues to be separate. It's like fight over the border issues to the south, but that should have nothing to do with Ukraine. Ukraine needs aid right now. It is a crisis right now, and it is arguably getting worse for the Ukrainians going into the winter. They, for reasons like this. So if you look at this aid, the overall US military aid in November to Ukraine was 82.2% lower than it was in the first half of 2023. Direct military aid to Ukraine was the lowest it was in the entire war. However, overall US aid, including USAI equipment orders, was $525 million, slightly higher than in October. Point being that you look at August, September, October, November, that is bad. I mean, it is. I would say presents quite a crisis for Ukraine militarily. So what gets me is that is getting used to leverage border compromises from Democrats, and I just wouldn't. In a perfect world, that just wouldn't be the case. It's like everyone would agree that Ukraine really needs assistance, and that has nothing to do with the border issues. And let's argue about the border issues over there. But tying the two things together means that it's going to be really difficult for Ukraine to get funding, but this side of the new year, arguably, and it's not looking easier. And these kind of promissory notes of people like Mike Johnson, we will do this and that will happen, doesn't look like that is going to happen anytime soon. And then when you get quotes like this from Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, you start to worry. So the situation for Ukraine could get worse if the West does not increase arms supplies, according to Stoltenberg. According to him, Ukraine is in a critical situation and it is necessary to prepare for bad news. Okay, let's dip into what he says here. So NATO Secretary General, we must be ready for bad news too. This is a war of attrition, battle for effectiveness, battle for logistics. Increasing ammunition production plays a decisive role. The more we support Ukraine, the sooner this war will end. We must understand that the victory of President Putin will become a tragedy for Ukraine but it will be dangerous for us as well. So his actual words here, I'm going to read them to you because I think this is important. It's worth stating. So, I'm always careful in making predictions about the situation on the front because wars are intrinsically unpredictable. The one thing we do know is that the more we support Ukraine, the faster this war will end. We must realize that a victory for Putin would be a tragedy for Ukraine, but it would also be dangerous for us. It is in our own self-interest to make everything possible for Ukraine to win. It is difficult to plan wars. Yes, it is true that little has changed on the front in recent months, but the Ukrainians have been able to inflict heavy losses on Russian forces by attacking with missiles deep behind the front lines. And I think that's worth noting. Destroying airplanes and helicopters and pushing the Russian Black Sea fleet into the eastern Black Sea. That means they will now be able to keep the sea lane open for ships carrying grain from Ukraine through the Black Sea. So these are big victories, even if they haven't been able to advance on the front lines. We have been prepared. We had to be prepared for bad news as well. Wars are phased, but we have to stand with Ukraine in both good times and bad. This is a war of attrition. A battle for efficiency, a battle for logistics, boosting munitions production is critical. We're working hard to make it happen. I will leave it to the Ukrainian senior military leaders to make difficult operational decisions. I think one of the problems we need to solve is the fragmentation of the European defence industry. This is interesting. This is something that Richard Barnes was talking about, is you can't separate politics from military. They need to be seen together. But like, your military aids your political strategy, right? So if you're going to have a somewhat unified European political strategy, but a completely fragmented military strategy, then that might present a load of challenges. And this is something that Leave voters for, I've talked about this before, for Brexit, were worried about, European army. I don't have any problem with that at all, personally. It's like, we've got a NATO army, we've got UN peacekeepers, and UN army. So this is just another aspect of that. And if you are going beyond the EU being just an economic union, into being a political union, then you need to consider how to align that with a military strategy. And some people say, well, it should just remain an economic union, but then economics is politics. Like, it's this kind of false distinction. Like, your economics as a country is intrinsically linked to your politics, your broader politics. You know, it's not like you vote a government in and they say, right, thanks for voting us in. By the way, we're only doing this and we're not dealing with economics at all. It's like you are primarily voting them in on economics. So if you're going to have an economic union, it is by definition a kind of political union. So and then if it's a political union, it needs to have a kind of a role needs to be played in terms of a military strategy within a political union. So it's kind of all or nothing thinking. I'm thinking it's all or nothing thinking is what I'm putting forward here. Now, not everyone likes that, right? You don't want to we want to be in the European Union for economic benefit, but other than that, we want complete sovereignty and etc. etc. And of course, there's that sliding line where you have to draw a line somewhere, and that's really difficult. And I get that, and I get that not everyone's going to be up for that kind of union, right? But there is a discussion to be had about the military strategy within the EU and how it should or shouldn't be politically integrated. So he says, we're not working together as closely as we should. I don't want to point the finger at anybody, but I think we need to realize that we are talking about the interests of Europe, and that is good for jobs in the industry. We must not let the increased demand for ammunition lead to higher ammunition prices. We need to increase the supply. So again, you've got like the economics of the military here as well to consider. Just so when you look at someone like Jens Stoltenberg from NATO, where he's completely concerned with security and stability within Europe, then of course he's going to be joining those dots in terms of military strategy as well as economic and political strategy within Europe. Okay, anyway, moving on. Swedish defense chief has said, I can say that right now the conditions don't exist for Ukraine to win the war. Quote, we can see in front of us that the war will continue for several years. So it's not a case of Ukraine are going to lose. There are three options here. You know, Russia outright win, Ukraine outright win, or a kind of extended frozen conflict. So even if Ukraine don't win, it doesn't mean that Russia win. Okay, there is an excluded middle. There is a middle to that. So here he's not saying that Russia will win, but it's like Ukraine won't win at this rate unless something changes. Poland plans to transfer more than 50 Krab self-propelled howitzers to Ukraine. So these are HS Krab that are built in conjunction with South Korea, and they've already provided a whole bunch of these. And if they are going to provide 50 more, then that is brilliant. It's a 155mm self-propelled howitzer compatible with NATO ammunition. Of course, again, providing more of those frames, you know, more of these bits of equipment will be replacement for the ones they lose, of course. But again, you know, the major issue is indeed ammunition supply. Right, moving on. Sorry, family has arrived, so if there's noise in the background, do apologise. Now that this delivery has been made public, we can be pretty sure of what the German €20 million package for the Ukrainian Special Forces announced in October actually contains. So this is something that Ukrainians have got, but now we're finding out details about it. 5 Caracal air mobile platforms. So these are these things that can be dropped by helicopter or whatever, and in some kind of paratroop or special forces operation, as well as probably 50 e-bikes, the EMUs. So some kind of not sure what e-bike means, whether are they battery operated. And 450 HLR 338. So these look like sniper rifles there. So delivery of the 5 Caracals will start this month and be completed by early next year. The delivery of the 450 HLR 338 already started. 15 have been delivered. Unfortunately, it's not yet possible to say when it will be completed. Of course, no details are possible about the personal equipment, which got also pledged via the same 20 million euros package. So there is other equipment as well in that. We are seeing Leopard 105 tanks operating on a combat zone on the front lines more and more. So interesting to see them. What does that tell you? Whether they are just need these vehicles. So they're putting... there's always this dilemma about, well, do we put our best tanks on the front line and use them? Well, what's the problem is if we do that and we lose those tanks, can we get replacement for them? That haven't yet been pledged, and then we lose our trophy pieces. But then it's like, what's the point of having them if you don't use them? Or do you put the Leopard 105s before you put the Leopard 2s on the front line, because you'd rather have them attrited? But then if they're less capable than the Leopard 2s, what's the point of using them to try and achieve your own? So you get these trade-offs, don't you, between the types of equipment that you end up committing or not. Okay, I did report this in the last video, but victory is everyone's responsibility. Wives of Ukrainian servicemen demand demobilization after 18 months of service in Kyiv. Topic of additional mobilization is extremely urgent. Most soldiers who joined the army in February 2022 are still serving. So there's the issue of rotation, demobilization, but also just boots on the ground. The Ukrainians is one of the biggest challenges, I think, at the moment is boots on the ground for them. Right, Exit 226, who I've interviewed on the channel here, says, and just to remind you, I'm doing a live stream later today in about 3 hours time. So truckers and farmers in various countries are blocking Ukrainian land ports and at the least have a connection to Russian disinformation. We'll talk about that in a second. Being from Alberta, where this same approach was used, I can say I believe governments should take action. So this is Hungarian drivers blocking Ukrainian trucks trying to leave Slovakia, according to UNIN. Needless to say, says Exit, this will have an effect on Ukraine, and countries whose entry points remain open will benefit as deliveries move to other locations. This will cost the Polish economy in the long run, and the actions are very short-sighted. However, partly why this is in this section to do with the military aid, here we have example of Polish truckers blocking a shipment of American patrol boats at the Ukrainian border, claiming that Ukrainian road transport companies are causing unfair competition. So this is affecting the provision of military equipment to Ukraine, and it's a serious thing. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the geopolitical section, because there are arguments as to connected to the war, to Russia. There are genuine issues that truckers have with the situation as it stands. Anyway, Peace Out 11 here saying there are growing numbers of Nepali, Cuban, Syrian and African soldiers fighting on the Russian side. Russians do not care about them and they won't be exchanged. What should we do with them? I guess that's with the POWs, but there is certainly more evidence that there are soldiers coming from far and wide, indicating that the Russians are doing this kind of crypto, you could call it crypto mobilization. Indeed, here we have Ukrainian soldiers of the 118th Mechanized Brigade capture 5 Russian soldiers of the 70th Guards Motorized Rifle Regiment, one of which, if I heard correctly, is a mercenary from Nepal. Others are residents of poor regions of Russian Federation, Krasnodar, Kraj, Dagestan, Republic of Muriel and Penza. So yeah, they are collecting troops from, as I say, far and wide. This is a way of them getting boots on the ground. So that's of a benefit to Russia, and they probably have to do less in terms of compensation. It's a kind of a win-win for the Russians, arguably. Right, moving on to geopolitical topics. I'm going to have a swig of tea. Sorry, the pause button was not working there. Anyway, I'm back with it. So, here, Arturi talks about the Jens Stoltenberg comment here, but he said there's a protest. This is on the back of a protest being held in Paris favouring Russia and Novorossiya, demanding to halt military assistance to Ukraine. Russia is organising protests again as Ukraine is mentioned less and less. This proves a need to continue open discussion on all platforms about the ongoing war. I totally agree. I would hope that this kind of protest is very small. It doesn't look particularly large. As a sort of small counter-protest from some Ukrainians. I imagine this is just diaspora Russians venting their spleen about stuff, but you can bet your bottom dollar that the Kremlin is funding that. Anyway, I find this a really interesting point. Okay, after the presidential elections in Russia in March 2024, Western leaders will have to decide whether to recognise Putin's legitimacy if he runs and wins. This was stated by Zelensky in an interview with the Associated Press. Quote, "This is why the game, scare quotes, game, will already be on the side of the Western leaders of the civilized world. By the way, there may be a turning point, the illegitimacy of President Putin," said Zelensky. It could be some, I guess, some pretty, I don't know whether I don't know what the rules are, but can we just not call the Russian elections legitimate? And what are the ramifications of that if it is done kind of formally from Western nations? If they say that is a sham election, you are not a democracy, you are, we're formally calling you a dictator. There is no way that those elections were bona fide, were credible. So, yeah, we're going to make that statement rather formally. What happens there? Maybe someone can help me with that one. Again, making Russia this pariah nation that is just almost not formally accepted by the rest of the world, or at least some parts of the world, the Western world, I guess, or allies of Ukraine. Right. Anton Geraschenko here is rightfully sort of pulling up this Luxembourg, the former president of Luxembourg at the OSCE meeting recently, saying this. Now, this is a great speech, he says. It was the beginning part of it was in French, but then he goes off and says this in English. And I just think this is great, publicly calling out Russia, calling out Lavrov here to his face before, standing up and leaving and not even listening to what Lavrov has to say.
But I want to say a few words to our Russian delegations. I have to tell you, maybe some of you will be shocked, but I had a good relations with Vladimir Putin. President Putin was someone I had calls, I had exchanges. And at the beginning of the war, also, I called Volodymyr Zelensky and President Putin, and I tried to have exchanges. And in the calls I had with Vladimir Putin, he told me about the Russian language, he told me about Nazi, he told me about biological weapons. But we see that the narrative of your side is not the right one. To start a war is easy. To finish a war shows how leaders are. I'm sorry that you have to listen to me and not your Minister of Foreign Affairs, because it would have been the first time I would be able to have an exchange with him. It's never too late to see that you did a big mistake. You did a big mistake. And I'm sorry, because I tried at the beginning to have exchanges with you. I got criticized from other countries. They considered me as not solidar to trying to reach the hand to stop a war, where innocent people are dying every day. So I just can tell you, I won't be able to stay here to listen to Lavrov's answer. But stop what is not explicable, where there is no reason. And believe me, strength is not to show that you are stronger, but to end the pain of millions of people. Thank you.
Ouch. So that was pretty effective. Actually, the beginning of the speech was cut off, and I think it's fair to play all of what he said. So I'm actually going to dip into the initial bit as well. Sorry to put this afterwards, but I realised in that excerpt it had actually been sliced off the beginning.
I want to say a few words to our Russian delegations, because I have to tell you, I belong to, I'm a strange guy. I'm Luxembourgish foreign minister. I was prime minister for 10 years. And my grandmother is from Russia. She was Orthodox. My grandfather was Jewish from Poland. My grandfather was Luxembourgish Catholic, and my grandmother was French and atheist. So I have all these different nations, cultures.
Interesting. So French atheist, Jewish, Catholic, Orthodox, Russian, Polish, right mix.
Religions and tolerance in myself. I'm married to a Belgian man, so I'm also gay. So in some of your countries, I wouldn't be able even to have rights. But to have Russia...
And interesting that now Russia has just announced that LGBT people are an extremist organization.
Roots and to have Russian contacts. I have to tell you, maybe some of you will be shocked, but I had a good relations with Vladimir Putin. President Putin was someone I had calls, I had exchanges. And at the beginning of the war, also, I called Volodymyr Zelensky.
And it goes on to say what you've already heard, but I think it's important to get the full context of who he is and where he's coming from, and also the fact that he says very clearly, look, I have had good relationships with Putin, like we have talked and etc. And he goes on. I think some of the other bit was cut in as well. I think there are other bits in there where it is longer there, where he talks about what Putin had said to him, just with a little bit more detail. Anyway, good stuff from him. UEFA has not included the Russian national team in the draw for the 2024-2025 Nations League season. Nations League is something that happens within kind of Europe that isn't the Euro, and it's not the World Cup, but it's a kind of other thing that runs alongside. But anyway, Russia aren't involved, so that's another example of how Russia are getting kind of squeezed out of international organizations, the squeezed out from participating kind of internationally. Well, actually, Ukraine has outmaneuvered Russia at the OSCE in chemical weapons in maritime agencies. I reported on this. So this week, Ukraine engineered Kremlin's defeats in 3 prominent global bodies: the Chemical Weapons Watchdog OPCW, Maritime Association IMO, and the European Security Forum OSCE. So there is this growing sense that people that Russia aren't really welcome in a number of places and are not getting voted in, and that is having this effect on pushing Russia further and further away from international I guess integration and interaction. Germany has closed consulates general in 3 Russian cities. The consulates in Kaliningrad, Yekaterinburg and Novosibirsk have ceased to operate. Representatives' offices in St. Petersburg and Moscow continue to function. 4 of the 5 German consulates in Russia were closed in May, when Berlin tried to reduce the number of its civil servants in the country to 350 at Russia's request. Germany, along with the other European countries, expelled dozens of Russian diplomats after Russia's invasion of Ukraine last year. And here we have a bit of a vox pop. Again, interesting to get an idea of what Russians think about this. Well, I don't know, she says. It's hard for me to judge, but we lived behind the Iron Curtain for so many years, and no one, excuse me, died from it. Again, this is the idea that they don't know their own history. Like the executions of the by the FSB or the KGB as was of like Communist Party members is a really interesting discussion from an expert FSB or a KGB historian on Silicon Curtain recently. You get a real insight into the interplay within Russia of the Communist Party and the KGB, and they weren't actually like super on board with each other, and the executions of so many people from the Communist Party by executions by the KGB ran into, he said, like dozens of thousands, maybe more. Just huge. So the idea that no one died because we were behind the Iron Curtain, well, actually, you need to look inwards a bit there. Well, of course, it doesn't promote mutual understanding, she says, yes. And I'm not saying it's a good thing. It's just that we've been through this situation once before. I think we'll get through it again. And just like last time when we were behind the Iron Curtain, people pulled up to us. I think the big Russian bear is kind as long as you don't provoke it. And so come, for God's sakes, let people come. Well, of course, it is a pity, says someone else, that there are fewer and fewer representations of other countries in our region. And on the contrary, the location of our region is conducive so that our citizens travel as much as possible, discover the world. It's becoming more and more difficult. Our country and Russian citizens will not lose anything and have not lost anything. We have gas. We have light, we have fertile land where everything grows. Everything is God's will, you see. They have no churches, they do not respect anything, they have gay parades. just so interesting what their views on all these kind of things are. They do not have anything. These things are unacceptable to us. It's just like, burying your head in the sand, putting your hands over your ears, la 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 la, at least we're not gay, la 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 la, type thing. It's just like, seriously? But of course, they are just being sold this Russian narrative on state TV. And do they seek knowledge of what's going on in their country from outside of their country? Do they seek knowledge of what's going on in the outside world from sources outside of their country? No, not in this case, one would think. If you're wondering what Russians really think, particularly propagandists, people in the Kremlin maybe, 2 years into this monstrosity, here's Solovyov again had the nerve to say this. I know I should be inured to their insanity, but it just never ends. Right, what's he said? Well, the Baltics will be next. And Solovyov said, that's someone else saying that. And he said, how long will that take? About 15 minutes? This idea that you don't say, no, don't be silly, of course we're not going to invade the Baltics. Like, if you were seriously thinking about reality and also what other people think of you from outside your country, you would not be advocating invading the Baltic nations on national television. But instead of saying, no, don't be silly, of course we're not going to do that, he said, yeah, how long will that take? About 15 minutes? I'd just like to remind Solovyov how long it's taken them to not quite take Bakhmut and they're still fighting over it now. I'd like to remind him how long it's taken to take Mariinka and they're not quite taking that yet. I'd like to remind him of how long and how many resources have been exhausted in taking these small areas as the second greatest army in the world, supposedly. So if you're suddenly going to take, forget Ukraine, right, we're going to move on to the Baltics, yeah, it's only going to take us 15 minutes. I'd like to say, really? And then when you have NATO involved directly, I mean, really? So, no, Solovyov, you haven't got a clue what you're talking about. But then, you can add to this. So, Russian borders end nowhere, says a banger hung at the Russia-Estonia border. So, we're talking about the Baltics here, at Ivangorod-Narva border. There's literally a massive propagandistic billboard saying Russian borders end nowhere. Putin's regime provokes European countries and wants the borders to be closed. This will allow the regime to blame the West for setting up the Iron Curtain. Russia's gradually being transformed into North Korea. Yeah, I mean, you could talk about saying they want their borders to be closed, but this is saying our borders end nowhere. Actually, our borders stretch on for as long as we want them to, because we are this imperialistic nation that has the right and the power and the ability to take control over anywhere. Our borders end nowhere. Anyway, going to talk about further border issues here. So almost 1,000 trucks are already standing at the Slovak border to enter Ukraine. Slovak transporters are on strike. This is such a challenge. It really is. And the representative of the Ukrainian State Border Service, Andrei Demchenko, said that there were more than 2,500 trucks on the Polish-Ukrainian border. So let's try and get a handle on what's going on here. So there have been these claims I've talked to you before about having connections to Russia through some of the organizations within Poland who are organizing this truckers blockade. However, Paweł Jasinski here puts the other side of the coin across, and this is a NAFO fella, but also has some kind of knowledge in this area. It says many are wondering why the hell Polish truckers and now Slovak too are protesting and blocking the border with Ukraine. As usual, there are several reasons for such stuff. I'll break it down for you all. There are two aspects here, minor and a major one. None of them, as some are suggesting, are Russian sabotage or influence. So here's someone that's saying they aren't Russian influence, but I would say that you definitely can see some Russian fingerprints there, as I showed you before in some of the investigative journalism. However, it admittedly might not be the main reason for it, right? Nor are they an organised action by nationalistic party in Poland. The party in question, Konfederacja, uses the opportunity, but it is pure opportunism. I'll start with the minor one. Polish trucks and drivers are getting stuck on the Ukrainian side of the border. I'll keep using Polish trucks, Polish drivers and Polish companies for reference, but it also applies to other non-Ukrainian or EU trucks, truckers and companies. Minor thing, Polish trucks, often empty, are stuck on the Ukrainian side, often for many days. Some queue for 10 or 11 days just to return to Poland. There are two reasons for that. So-called solidarity lanes. So these are fast-track lanes for key goods and e-churner or EQ system both are abused. This is possibly the genuine issues that Polish truckers have and other truckers. Ukrainian drivers and border guards abuse the solidarity lanes by letting Ukrainian trucks use them while carrying non-essential goods, while Polish trucks, even empty, have to wait in the queue for checks. It would be fair if it would apply to all trucks and drivers. Ukraine has an electronic queue system similar to the Polish one called e-Cherha or EQ. Trucks register in the system and queue electronically, getting notified when it's their turn to drive in the crossing and undergo control or checks. Managed by the DPSU, Ukrainian border guard, they abuse e-Cherha, push Polish or EU trucks down in the queue and pull up Ukrainian ones to get them faster to the crossing and clearance. Those two things are unfair per se, but also mean trouble for Ukrainian truckers who have to follow the EU mobility package later in the major section. So the major issue is multi-layered. Okay, so that's your minor issue. This is a major issue. EU transport companies, trucks and drivers have multiple obligations to fulfill. First of all, within the frame of the EU mobility package, the basics are here. I won't go into that. If it doesn't apply to Ukrainian truckers, they don't have to follow those rules. So Ukrainian truckers are allowed to operate in the EU but don't have to follow the mobility package. E.g., every 4 weeks, drivers are obliged to return home for a minimum of 45 hours. Ukrainian drivers don't have to. It's a bit like having your is it your tachometer and stuff like that. So in the UK, and I don't know coming out of the EU whether we still have to abide by these rules as much, but you only are allowed to do so much driving. It's safety regulations so that you don't end up crashing, so on and so forth. And this is kind of looks like it's part to do with that. But the Ukrainian drivers are not part of the EU, right? So they don't have to fulfill these rules. But since the war began, the EU has opened up to Ukraine to try and support Ukraine. And this is where the genuine tensions are coming. The rest periods can't be spent in the vehicles, and it doesn't apply to Ukrainian drivers. So they can stop if they have to rest and just rest in their vehicles rather than going to roadside infrastructure to rest up. 4 days of break between cabotage operations, not for Ukrainian truckers. Every 8 weeks, a vehicle, truck or van has to return to the country of the company's location, i.e. the country where the vehicle is registered, not for Ukrainian vehicles, and the list goes on, but you get it. Financial aspects. Ukraine has lower taxes and social insurance, fixed ones. Poland has progressive taxes and social insurance. Ukrainian truckers make between 700 and 1,000 euros per month net. Minimal wage for a Polish trucker is 6,000 Polish, so about 1,380 euros. So it's more than that. But a Polish trucker makes way more. He says a Polish trucker makes around 2,800 euros net a month, consisting of a wage and employee allowance net. The employer has to cover state social insurance, which at this wage is at least another 400 euros, plus employer allowance, also tax. So this is then the kind of employer has other costs incumbent upon them. Diesel fuel is cheaper in Ukraine than in the EU by 10 to 20%, depending on the country, which is also a factor. All in all, truckers and truck companies from Ukraine are allowed to operate in the EU, but don't have to follow EU rules. Their costs are at least 5 to 6 times lower, and compared to Polish and EU companies, Ukrainian drivers can work much more, are paid way less, and the rules that skyrocket operational costs for EU carriers don't apply to Ukrainian companies and trucks and drivers. This isn't fair competition. It's not even unfair competition. This is dumping. So big carriers in Poland and the EU then that operate EU-wide on a large scale are not endangered, as their customers require them to follow the rules and the EU mobility package, but small local ones operating mostly in Poland in this case are unable to compete and go bankrupt, and that's why they are protesting. Desperation. They are okay with fair competition. If Ukrainian truckers are to operate in the EU and compete, that's fine, but the same rules should apply. Otherwise it's not fair, and Ukraine is not an EU country yet and won't be one for a long time. So that's the end of his case. There are arguments going the other way, as you can see from the thread. I mean, if you want to go and read sort of threads like this, people are arguing yes, but all sorts of different points here and there. But I think that there probably is a complexity to this, and I think that it is difficult when you look to help out Ukraine, but and it's the same with the kind of cheap grain issues within Poland and Slovakia and similar sort of countries. Okay, we're trying to help Ukraine, but at the end of the day, that can disadvantage our own indigenous employees and sectors here. So whatever the situation is, it needs to be sorted out. So sort it out. Like the EU and these nations and Ukraine need to get together and sort this shit out and sort this stuff out, sorry to swear, this stuff out now, because this is not helping Ukraine. It might be helping those truckers and it might be helping people, and Ukrainian border guards are going to give preferential treatment to their own, but this is not helping out in the long run, and this is endangering relationships between countries, and it's stopping economic activities taking place, but it's also stopping military aid coming into the country and as efficiently as possible. So this is super important, needs to be solved. There are, on the other hand, countries like Romania, well, not many countries, so Romania here are actually staying broadly on board with helping Ukraine. So considering the numerous stories about border blockades, grain transportation issues, and the dominance of pro-Russian politicians in the parliaments of Ukraine's neighbours, I think we rarely mention Romania's significant and supportive role. Thank you, Romania, says someone here. So that, there are these different approaches to Ukraine and to the issue from various neighbours, but I think there is an issue that needs sorting. Right, there is an escalating row. I haven't actually reported on it, but it has been rumbling on for a few days that the former president Poroshenko has been blocked from leaving Ukraine. Now, he's someone who's actually helped a lot. He does a lot of fundraising, gets kit for the army, and so on and so forth. But Zelensky's allies have briefed media that Poroshenko was meeting Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban. So he's blocked from leaving. Parliament official Alexander Kornienko says he received secret info and had to block the trip. Anyway, this is causing something of a concern. It comes after the mayor of Kiev, Vitaly Klitschko, strongly criticized Zelensky in a Der Spiegel interview. So Klitschko is one that is looking to be a kind of foil for Zelensky. I don't think he will challenge him as far as presidential becoming the president. I don't think he'll be able to get that many votes, but he is a bit of a thorn in the side for Zelensky on the domestic front. So he has said at some point we will no longer be able to be different from Russia, where everything depends on a whim of one man. So you will get political movements inside Ukraine on a domestic front where they will be trying to be opportunistic or have genuine issues with the way Zelensky is doing things. And here, there looks like a brewing issue with what's going on with Poroshenko not being allowed to leave. However, if you've got a former president leaving to meet with Viktor Orban, unless he's really fighting Ukraine's corner there, I would be thoroughly skeptical of that kind of move. So who knows what's going on? But, not everyone inside Ukraine is going to be happy with Zelensky and with how things are being run. Of course, you expect that. That's going to happen. I just hope it doesn't get in the way of Ukraine prosecuting a successful defense. And to leave this on a more positive note, Glasgow has twinned with Mykolaiv, which we've already seen. Denmark has been doing all this work in reconstruction or planning for and funding reconstruction of the area. Glasgow is twinning with Mykolaiv, uniting through shipbuilding after departing Russian Rostov-on-Don. So there must have been some twinning with Rostov-on-Don that they are now no longer doing. So Scottish city is twinning with the Ukrainian southern city as a sign of friendship and solidarity. That's pretty cool. Hopefully that can give some benefit to, really to both cities, but to Mykolaiv there. Anyway, that's enough from me for this second video. I know it's a long one. There was an awful lot to go through. I'm going to whiz through a quick, 10-minute, hopefully 10-minute tops, frontline update next, because JR has done a mapping. So thank you to him, and that'll come next, hot on the heels of this. Take care. Speak soon.